Hi, I'm Tony Mejia, site pastor in Forest. If you're new, part of Vitalpoint Church, you're still trying to figure all of this out, welcome. Has anyone ever caught your attention and you just wanted to ask them, what are you doing? My wife's grandmother, she had a servant's heart. Literally, as soon as we were having family meals and she heard the amen, she would be up and running. She'd be trying to fill plates, refill drinks, and do whatever it takes. She would start thinking about how someone could use this and use that. The family would actually be really annoyed about this. They'd be like, why can't you just sit down and enjoy the meal? She wasn't doing this out of obligation. She actually wasn't even doing this out of trying to impress anybody. She was doing this because she has the spiritual gift of serving. And she literally got saved when she was a lot older, and she wasn't like this. It wasn't until Jesus came into her life. One of her children actually asked her, why were you like that? And she said, because I wanted to show people Jesus. As we journey on through this empowered series, we've been looking at different spiritual gifts. And today, it's the spiritual gift of serving. And some of us have this gifting, and us who don't, we might actually be wondering, why do you do what you're doing? Serving actually reflects, it's a way that God reflects who he is in our lives, reflects how he cares for us, his attention to detail, even showing how he is the God of action. We've been using this anchor verse in 1 Peter, and I want to start there today because you need to know that each and every one of us has a spiritual gift. And at the same time, each and every one of us are called to serve. So let's go to 1 Peter 4, 10 and 11. And it says this, as each has received a gift, use it to serve one another as good stewards of God's varied grace. See, we see the word serve, and it's not attached to one single spiritual gift. This is actually for all of us. God has called us to serve one another. That's one of the purposes of our spiritual gift. And we're actually going to look at the original language here when it comes down to serve, because this word is very important. But at the same time, the reason why we would go to the original word is so that we can get the original meaning. Because at times we can muddle with our own understanding. But we really want to see what the writer has for us. And this word is diakoneo. And diakoneo was actually used here by Peter, the writer, in such a revolutionary way. It wasn't this when it was told to the ancient Greeks at that time, these variations would actually mean this go-between, this person that is waiting, this person attending, this person that is serving. And the imagery would be someone that would be a lowly servant who would be doing things for someone else's selfish gain. But he was flipping the meaning here. What he's saying is that it's doing work that is accomplishing a greater purpose, a servant with great implications. Because the thing is, as followers of Jesus, we're all given spiritual gifts. Yet every spiritual gift is a go-between. It's us being this go-between of this real God in real life in real time. It's actually us expressing who he is in real time. It's so amazing how Jesus did this himself as he is our model of living it out. If we go to Mark chapter 10, we have this moment where we have these two disciples, these two brothers, and they are asking Jesus, hey, can I share in your glory? Can I take a piece of what you are going to be known for? Can we actually have the same level of everyone sees us in the same different kind of way, but in a negative way? So here these brothers are asking, they actually get their mother involved. And it says this in Mark chapter 10, verse 42 to 45. It says this, and Jesus called to them, I love that part, and said to them, you know that those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles rule it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them? But it shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant. And whoever would be first among you must be a slave of all. Does that sound great to anyone? Maybe those who have the spiritual gift of serving. But Jesus is saying, hey, they're having their eyes on the rulers, on the influencers, and on the riches like we can as well. And their ruling is over us and in such a way that it actually presses down and actually doesn't provide anything good. It's actually would be the original meaning of the Greek word. But here he was saying that they have something different, that God is calling them, Jesus is calling them to something different. And Peter was here for this moment. This is what it says in 45. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. These disciples, they were asking to be in this position of glory. But what Jesus was asking them is to be a go-between. This bridge of God and others revealing his love in real time through serving. There's this old saying of being the hands and feet of Jesus. Some of us remember that. But I love the imagery of hands and feet. I was actually thinking about Vitalpoint Church and how we walk with those who may have never attended church before, who have given up on church. And if that sounds like you, honestly, thank you so much for being here today. And Jesus met people in their spaces like this. I think of Thomas, who had a moment of doubt, which we could say that he gave up on his faith. And here he is, and Jesus reveals his hands to Thomas so that Thomas would begin to live out and begin to explore and grow in faith. And that's the opportunity we get to be as go-betweens, is that we show what Jesus has done in our lives and for the whole world as he came, died, and rose from the dead. That his life and his teaching are so powerful, but we get to do it through our hands and feet by serving. And what I love about serving is it actually helps ourselves and our spiritual gift and our focus to align with God's intended purpose. Because serving is actually a place where you can discover your spiritual gifts. Like, I didn't know I had the spiritual gift of teaching. When I was a teenager, I actually had this moment where I was totally embarrassed in front of all my peers, where I was shaking in my boots. I had that page literally flying in the air because I was so nervous. And I swore that I would never share in front of anyone ever again. I found myself in church and began to serve with some people. And one of the people that I was serving with, she actually said, Tony, you have the gift of teaching. I didn't like school, and school didn't like me. So I didn't really truly understand what she was saying. But as I began to serve, I began to see the spiritual gifts, begin to see that God has called me and has a part to play. How many of us are going to be discovering our spiritual gifts as we begin to serve, as we continue to serve, as we step into these moments of faith and understanding that serving brings so much? But it's not just serving, it's also being connected in community. So if you're not on a serving team, I would go to your welcome center right after service. Maybe go to your site pastor, or you can go to vitalpointchurch.com. In the next several weeks, actually coming up really soon, we're going to be doing your Love Your Neighbor boxes. These boxes are going to be these invitations for Easter, and we're going to be handing them out. This is a one-time opportunity to serve. And this might be your opportunity to connect and just see what it's like, because that serving brings eternal impact. And that's one thing that we get to understand, is that what God calls us to do in serving has such great eternal impact that sometimes we can't even imagine. So we are all called to serve, yet there are the spiritual gifts. And I would love to begin to unpack what it looks like when you're functioning in the gift of serving. And what I find is that when we begin to serve, we begin to see how there are so many characteristics. Because did you know that the majority, actually a lot of people, I'd like to say, have the gift of serving? And that's good. That's needed. Because the mission and vision and kingdom assignment of Vital Point Church, even the kingdom of God, becomes so practical and tangible and real and practical when we are using our hands and feet in serving, especially us who are given the spiritual gift of serving, which I have. And what I can say about it is we get it done. Anybody else happy about that? But I would love to give you a list of characteristics. And when we're looking at these characteristics, it's not like I have to hit every single one of them, or don't even use this list as a limit, but see it as, hey, maybe I do have this spiritual gift and I would like to explore this in community. So maybe it's finding joy in doing. Maybe you're a person that is very hardworking and you just find so much joy in it. Maybe you find yourself committed to finishing things. As you start it, you want to finish it. Maybe you're able to perceive and anticipate needs during the moment or in people's lives. Maybe you have a memory of others and their preferences. Maybe you have a really good memory of how things should function or how things go. Maybe you actually get frustrated when people actually don't commit like they should, right? What about you may find yourself too busy? Maybe you find yourself overstepping. Maybe you feel rejected when you offer to serve and someone says no. I know that wasn't all positive, but it's great to look at it this way so that when we begin to see that God has designed us and given us these spiritual gifts and longings to function fully in our giftings. And I want to go to Romans chapter 12, verse 7. And it says this: if service in our serving. Paul is actually the writer of this. He wrote most of the New Testament. And he's talking about how each and every one of us has a part to play in the body of Christ. He's like, if you are called to serve, you best be serving. Paul actually introduces himself in a lot of his epistles or his letters to the church by saying, I'm Paul, the servant or bondservant of Jesus. It's this posture that he's coming out of. Because when we have that posture of serving, things just come in differently. This is for all spiritual gifts. But here we're talking about the gift of serving. And what I want to say is that your ability and your willingness to serve is a gift. It truly is. When we are functioning in the gift of serving, it brings life transformation. And sometimes it's not even seen. So I want to take a moment and actually thank all those and shout out people who don't want to be shout out, the people who don't want to be recognized. I was thinking about the tech team, the media team. I was thinking about the E-team, the prayer team, the kids team, people who rather work in the background of things and not be noticed. But all of you who serve in that way actually help in each and every one of our services. Your serving actually brings life transformation by what you may think is little and not important, but know that it truly is. And it's not just your ability to serve, it's your willingness to serve that we love to say, thank you so much on behalf of Vital Point Church. And when I was teaching in Poplar Hill, there's this young guy named Ken, and if you know, you know. He came up to me and he said, hey, can I refill your coffee? And I said, nah, it's all right. I declined him. And he said, hey, let me do this for you so you can do what you came to do. This literally pushed me back because he's totally right. Each of us has a role to play, and serving plays such an important part. And the function of, so we're going to look at this as what it looks like when we function in the gifting. So you know you're functioning in the gift of serving when you're more than okay not being noticed. See, I want to caution this first. This is not about you not being appreciated. This is not about you hiding. This is not about you being taken advantage of. This is about you serving because you're called to be seen and known by the teams. But what happens is when you're functioning in the gift of serving, you actually function in a way that you're in the background, unnoticed, and you're okay with not being noticed because you know that something is happening. God is stirring. God is doing a good work. And serving that way is so important because most of the time, the only time that the gifts of serving actually gets noticed is when things go wrong, right? But what's beautiful about this is that as we're serving, it's just such an important part. So you know you're functioning in this gifting when you are just in this place of not being noticed, but you know that God is moving because of what he's called us to do. Because serving is not about being recognized, but it's about reflecting Jesus. Because under the same breath, the gift of serving is felt by all of those who are served. When we serve, we actually reflect God's love to the world, to the small world that we live in, to the people in our lives, to our workplaces and all of that. As we serve, it's so amazing how we reflect that. I actually think about my grandmother, who lived in a third world country, and she was a single mother, and she was not only caring for her children, she was caring for the community. She was checking up on the elderly. She was taking on other children. She was feeding people. She didn't have much, but she did so much with what she had, and she served. And she didn't get any recognition, even though I think they should have named some villages and towns after her, but that's not why she did it. She was the only Christian in my family at the time, and she was literally pouring out, revealing and showing Jesus in such practical and beautiful ways with her hands. Don't underestimate the work that God has called you to. Don't underestimate the work that goes unnoticed because it's part of God's design and plan, and it's so good of what he can do. So I want to pause for a moment. I want you to think about somebody that served you when you didn't expect it. How did that impact you? Now think, who's God calling you to be a go-between for? Because who says God has not called you to be a go-between? Sharing God's love, Jesus' love, through your hands, through your feet, through serving. Jesus would do actually something very miraculous, something that would change the world forever. And it's found in John chapter 13, verse 12 to 17. It says this: when he had washed their feet, that is actually what happened that changed the world. And he put on his outer garment and resumed his place. And he said to them, "Do you understand what I've done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you're right, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and your teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you also shall do just as I have done to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them." In Jesus' time, washing feet is for the go-between. It's actually for the gopher, right? Go for this, go for that. Those people that are serving or attending and waiting, and they had a low status. And here comes Jesus. He says, we're going to flip the script. We're going to do it differently that he's called us to. I was thinking about this woman that was homeless and where I used to serve. She was a woman that she would come into the service and not look at any man, not including myself, because she was coming out of a place of trauma. And I was just so happy just to share the same space with her. And slowly we would have small little conversations. And then this one moment she spills her coffee, and immediately I go down and I begin to wipe it up. And she said, "Pastor, that's not a job for a pastor." I said, "It is for this one." I didn't know that those simple words would actually begin to build trust. I didn't know that that action of serving her in that moment would build this trust where we got to witness her housed, also her sharing the gospel or the good news of Jesus to women in shelters. Again, don't underestimate the gift of serving and the power that God has called us to into these little moments and times, because when you are functioning in the gifts of serving, that's when you're being practical with your faith. That's when you're finding yourselves in these moments where you're actively looking around, where you see things happen, where you actually capture the moment and you're like, "Hey, I can go do this. I can be that." And you just begin to be so practical with your hands, but that's also being practical with your faith, because that's when things get done, but it's also about getting God's will done. Because that's what we're actually functioning and doing, is that if the Son of Man was called to humbly serve, he said, so are we. We're doing his will in a practical and real way, tangible, being that go-between with the real God, real life in real time. And we're going to go back to our anchor verse in 1 Peter chapter 4, 10 to 11. I skipped 11 on purpose, by the way. But we're just going to go to verse 11. This is what it says. "Whoever speaks as one who speaks of oracles of God, but whoever serves as one who serves by the strength that God supplies, in order that in everything God may be glorified through Jesus Christ. To him belong the glory and dominion forever and ever. Amen." It's like God knows us who have the spiritual gift of serving. It's like God knows who he gives these gifts to. Because you know the word that people have a hard time saying with the gift of serving. We're actually going to say it out loud on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. No. That's right. No is that word that is so hard. But if we go to the Gospels, which is the life and teaching and death and resurrection of Jesus and the account of it in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, we actually see Jesus in these moments of saying no, where he says no to a crowd that is desperately coming to him. But he was called to another village. We actually see him saying no to some of his family members. We actually have him saying no to people pleasing and the religious and their pressures. If Jesus said no, then we can say no too. But the thing is, Jesus said no so he could say yes to something else, because he spent this time, and we're called to serve, but we're called to serve in God's strength. So you know that you're functioning in the gift of serving when you are relying on God's strength. We actually see Jesus retreat many times as well, where he's spending time with God. It wasn't just to retreat because he wouldn't be tired after. He would retreat to find strength so he would keep serving and serving and serving and serving. We actually find ourselves in moments where we feel so tired, maybe even burnt out. Maybe that we stepped away from serving because of that. But here God calls us to function in the gift of serving through his strength that he supplies. He's going to supply it, but it takes us going to him, spending time with him, growing in our faith, being in community, because that's when we find endurance and will in weariness, joy in sacrifice, and we actually find fulfillment beyond all human efforts. These are these moments and times where we realize that serving is not about what we do, but serving is about who we do it for. And there's this story in Luke chapter 10, verse 38 to 42. And you have Mary and Martha, and Jesus spending time with them. And Mary is literally spending great time with Jesus, but Martha has Jesus over, so she's cleaning, she's cooking, she's serving, she's doing her best. And she actually gets so frustrated with Mary that she calls her out in front of Jesus. Anyone else like drama? But here you have her complaining while she's serving. It wouldn't be something that we would, connect with, right? But here's this moment. I would love to read what Jesus said. He said this, but the Lord answered her, Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things. See, Martha's mistake wasn't serving. Martha's mistake is that she was not recognizing that she was in the presence of Jesus, and she lost the moment that she was in. Because the gift of serving should always be rooted in relationship, not just responsibility. Because God calls us into these relationships as being a go-between. It's not just about the responsibilities and getting things done. It's about that relationships that happen, the connection, the community, connecting us with God in real time. And I love to read you the words that Jesus said. He said, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen a good portion which will not be taken away from her. I want to quickly break this down. He said, but one thing is necessary. When he's talking about this, he was saying, hey, look, Martha, it's all the distractions and busyness that your attention is on. But the one thing that is necessary is connecting with Jesus, because connecting to Jesus is where we find our life. That's where we find the life-giving source that we in serving, the strength that he supplies. But a lot of times what we do is just we kind of put our, we just try to push ahead. But he says, no, the one necessary thing is to connect with Jesus, allowing him to begin to be the center of our lives, to explore what that looks like. And he says that Mary has chosen the good portion, the good part. The good part truly is us spending time with God. And I know we kind of think like, oh, you know what? Serving makes me a good person. Serving does this. Serving makes me feel good at times. But the best part truly is our time with God. In these moments where we see him working in our Sunday gatherings, in our connect groups, while we're serving on teams, especially when we're spending time with him. That's actually the true good portion of our lives. And he says, which will not be taken away. It will not be taken away. Everything else can, but our time with him is everlasting and so good. Because activity for Jesus should never replace our proximity with him. In other words, our proximity with Jesus will lead to activity with Jesus. Our time with him will lead us to serve. Our time with him, and because he'll begin to stir in our hearts who he is and his love for others. Because like Martha, we're called to serve. Again, the mistake wasn't serving, but it's to be actively serving like Martha. And like Mary, we should be close with Jesus. And like Jesus, we should find our strength in him to begin to serve again or continue to serve, where he calls us to this spiritual gift of serving. But this is also for us, all of us, as followers of Jesus, to continue to serve. My son and my wife are amazing at serving. Like they definitely have the spiritual gift of serving. They just thrive in it. It's who they are inside of church and outside. And here it's spending, they just love it. But my daughter, on the other hand, man, it's like pulling teeth. But when she was 2 years old, I had this thought. If God calls all of us to serve, that includes my daughter who's on the spectrum. So I noticed that I was serving with the food bank and delivering food to a shut-in. And I was like, you know what? This is for her as well. So she had to stand in line. She had to go get the food. She had to drive over. She had to knock on the door and take the food upstairs. And that was hard for her for the first couple months until she began to get the rhythm and she would find joy in it. My wife reminded me that we would talk to her about how this is coming out of our love for Jesus. And I know that she loves Jesus because she worships him with the songs that she loves. And especially when the world feels so overwhelming around her. But she has a part to play in serving. And so do you. The spiritual gift of serving plays such an important part in our lives, especially our world around us. Because our world says, go get yours. But here he's flipping the script and saying, hey, why don't we say, how can I serve you? How can I give? How can I be in this moment? How can I give my hands? How can I be there and be present? God calls us into these moments, into these things. And just like my mother-in-law, not my mother-in-law, my wife's grandmother, where people asked, why are you doing what you're doing? When we are active, when we are serving, people will ask, why are you doing this? And may we say it's because of Jesus. If it's a one-off opportunity of putting together love your neighbor boxes, if it's joining a team, it's time to serve. It's time to step into your giftings. It's time to see the joy that we find in serving God within our church and outside of it. Because it truly brings such an impact as we are the go-between of the real God in real life in real time.